Good morning, everyone. If you have a Bible, if you could turn to Genesis 11. And just as you do so, a bit of good news. You will know we've been looking for people to do this Equip program, which is starting in September. We've had the advert for quite a while, looking for 4 people to give a year to this church to service in all kinds of ways. One of the collective project will be really important is the 3 p.m. service. And I can confirm that after interviews we have 4 people. There are a few things that need to be worked out, so please do pray over that. But hopefully in the coming days we will be able to reveal those names. And the main thing we will then need is accommodation. So I put that out there now. If you have a spare room and a willing heart, if you'd like to have a conversation, particularly with myself or Michael Omini, who's been leading worship, who is spearheading the Equip program, that would be wonderful. So we celebrate. We're really thankful. We've come across some amazing people who are eager to serve this church and are exploring long-term ministry in their life. So this is a wonderful thing to play a part in. Okay, so we are carrying on our series, which is entitled Origins, and we are looking at the origin of language. So we come to the Tower of Babel. Genesis 11, we will read through to verse 9. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. And they said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. As otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so that they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. And there ends the reading of God's holy word. Don't know if we have any language specialists in the church today. I'm certainly not one of them. If there was one thing I was very bad at school, it was languages. When you got to year 8, you had to pick, were you going to do German or Spanish? Everyone had to pick. But because I was so poor at languages, a special dispensation was made for myself, and I didn't have to carry on with languages. In year 8, I got 1 out of 23 in the German test. I knew that dein and der meant something. So when asked the question, right in German, ask someone how you would find the bus station, I wrote these words: "Where is bus?" And no wonder my German teacher often called me Dummkopf, which I believe is not a very nice thing. So when I first read these verses, thinking of the whole world speaking one language, all people being together, working collaboratively, it seems like a utopian dream. And it's amazing. You've got social unity, you've got technological advancements. They've gone from stone to brick, where they can really build substantial buildings. And it's amazing what we have been able to achieve as humans, going all the way back into ancient history. If we just have a look at some of the marvels of the pyramids, I've never been able to go and see them, but to think all those thousands of years ago that people without the technology, without the cranes and the diggers, were able to somehow put that together. Or more in our own country, Stonehenge. I think it was last year they discovered that the altar stone comes all the way from North Scotland. Now, my geography is pretty bad, but I know Stonehenge is nowhere near Scotland. And just to think how people, ancient people, with very little, were able to put those things together. But also, as you'll subtly notice, these impressive buildings have not been used to worship Yahweh, the one true God. And it actually goes to show that although we are capable of creating some great things, it is when humans get together that we're capable of much evil. The ingenuity, the greatest minds have come up with weapons which can cause destruction all over this world. Sophisticated systems, intelligent people, good with technology, right now in their thousands, daily are scamming people. You know, our phones have become a bit more sophisticated. You get a call, it says, unknown number, possibly a scam. And we think, maybe I won't pick that one up today. The key when it comes to the Tower of Babel, the key lesson I get is that great things can become evil things. It's all about motivation. If you've got your Bible open, which I hope you have, if you could turn to chapter 10, you will see what is called the Table of Nations. And what we have from the author of Genesis is, it's not chronologically as we've gone from the flood was the last story that we looked at, so we're skipping a few chapters ahead now. Most likely Moses, whoever wrote Genesis, has made sure that the nations and the formations of the nations actually comes before the why of the nations. So we have the what in the Table of Nations, and then we have the why happening in chapter 11. So look at chapter 10. It says in verse 1, it's the account of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's sons, and how generations and descendants come, and languages. And then it says, in verse 9, of one of the descendants of Ham, a man called Nimrod, that he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. The first centers in verse 10, the first centers of his kingdom were Babylon. It names a few other places. And then it adds this interesting detail in Shinar. Now look at chapter 11, verse 2. Humans, they get together, and it says they found a plain in Shinar. So what we have here is the beginning of Babylon. If you know our Bible, you have here the Hebrew word is the word balal, which means confusion, which as we get into in the Greek basically is Babylon. This antithesis to Jerusalem. Babylon represents human pride. It represents humans who look at themselves and think about their capability, their independence, all that they can do. They look outside at each other and collectively what we can do, but they never look upward, and they're never dependent on God. It's the secular dream. It's humanism, a society formed without God. And we see their motivation in chapter 11, verse 4. It says, then they said to one another, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens. And here is their agenda, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. And the Hebrew word, in the Hebrew, it doesn't really translate as reaches. It more reads like this: let us build ourselves a city with a tower that is by or with the heavens. Do you see the subtle difference there? Because on first reading, you might read and think, oh, those people, post-flood, they're not sure how to have a relationship with God. So they do a noble thing. They try and build a tower, maybe a place of worship, so they can kind of get towards God. Maybe they're on the right tracks. But no, they're trying to build an alternative. They're trying to build a place that is with heaven, where the altar, where the shrine is not to Yahweh, but is a shrine to themselves, as they're trying to make their name great. And essentially, if we go to the next slide, it's fair to say they're trying to create the new Eden, a city really representing security. In Eden, God was our home. We had fellowship with one another, that sense of belonging, but it all stemmed from a relationship with God. And of course, it was in Eden that God said, go forth, multiply, spread out. And what we see happening in what's happening in this chapter, in verse 7, it talks about the fact that God has to scatter them because they've forgotten their mission, trying to be secure, belonging to each other, society, that's all it's about. There's a tower that represents significance. That rather than them getting their significance from being daughters and sons of God, significance becomes in what you achieve. Building a monument which is all about your great achievements. Rather than success being our great devotion to God, it has become about great achievements for ourselves. And that then leads to them making a name, praise for themselves. Whereas Eden were a place where people could look around and marvel and worship God who walked with them. They want to look and marvel and basically pat themselves on the back of all they've been able to accomplish. Babel represents security, significance, and praise of humans. An unholy trinity. And of course, none of those things ever drive us, do they? Do you see the parallels? Do you see the things that, if we're honest with ourselves and a wider society, the idols we so easily build? A city, security, it's good to belong. We had Phil Knox come and talk about the importance of friendship, of having tight relationships. But we are in a society where we can become obsessed with popularity, what people think of us. That if only we're a part of that tribe, if only we belong, we have everything that we need to be secure in life. It's good to have close friends, but it's not good to be cliquey, to form cliques, to have holy huddles. We see this a bit in the New Testament, time and time again. If you think about the Transfiguration, Jesus leads his closest disciples up the hill. He is shown in all his glory, whiter than white, holiness. And then next to him, either side, we have Moses and we have Elijah. Peter sees this. He's in awe. He's struck down. And then he says, let's put a tent here and let's just dwell here. We've got everything we need. Let's settle here. And immediately, cloud, the other characters go, and Jesus goes down the mountain and he carries on his mission. And the reality is they're called, when he is resurrected, to go into the whole world and make disciples. And it has always been the church's problem that we limit that. That although we've been called to be witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and the ends of the earth, we like to be comfortable with where we are and what we've got. We've been called to gather, grow, and go. But we like to stay in our huddles and in our cliques because we feel secure. If I think about this 3 p.m. service, I have to give you a full disclosure that when I was given the task to try and develop an afternoon service, it did not fill me with joy. In fact, I thought this is very divisive. This is in the middle of the afternoon. What do you want to do to my marriage? This is going to be very disruptive for family life. And there is that sense of which we love our 11:15 service. Can we just leave everything here? Can I just take a picture? Can we just preserve this? We like to grow, but we like to set our limits. And what we see throughout church history is just as we get comfortable, God starts to make us uncomfortable. Why can't God just give us the new building now? We all move in there, we all live all together, we know each other. And we know for the time being, God has some very different plans, and he's calling us to gather, to grow, and then to go. That we're called not simply to seek our kingdom, but his kingdom. Look at the tower, the sign. We all want that superlative, that est in our life, in whatever field it is, in our workplace, in our status. We want to be the strongest, the biggest, the smartest, the fastest, the richest, maybe the loudest. We want to be at the top so that others will look up to us and so that others will depend on us. We want to be independent, don't we? Like the great poet William Henley was secretly saying, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. And so we go about our days, praying our prayers, but perhaps living as practical atheists, not really dependent on God, but striving to achieve things for ourselves. We create a monument of our achievements, and so we carry on as ladder climbers, compulsive overcommitters, and control freaks. And maybe I just speak for myself here. We look for love and power and purpose and meaning, but in all the wrong places. So busy building our kingdom to just first seek God's kingdom, knowing that when we aim to follow him, when we aim to serve him, when we're going after his greatness and making sure he is glorified, when success means our great devotion rather than our great achievements, then God will give us all that we need as he continues to provide. Why do we do this? Well, C.S. Lewis says it so well. He says this: the books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust to them. It was not in them. It only came through them. And what came through them was longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshippers. For they are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have not yet visited. And so we must aim not for these things and what are often good and what are often gifts, but to know the giver more himself. And what does God do when we're perhaps too secure in ourself and our identity is out of him, where we put significance in what we're trying to achieve, when we easily want the glory for ourselves? Well, he does what he did for the people of Babel. Mercifully, he scatters in order to redeem. Look at verse 5. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. And I love this very anthropomorphic language. This tower, this mighty tower that they've been able to build, so proud of themselves. And yet God has to stoop down, has to squint at what appears to him as like a dot. And he confuses their language so that the person who is the plumber doesn't understand the electrician, doesn't understand the carpenter, doesn't understand all the different workmen. And so it becomes a lovely building project that just halts and collapses. And so it rings true the words of Psalm 127:1, which you can write over this story, but we can write over the story of our lives when we've tried to build something that God is not in. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. I wonder in your life, how have you experienced that? That you've been building something, you've put everything into this thing. It is your security, it is your monument. And God mercifully allows it to just crumble so that you would once again turn to him. I remember this happening very distinctively when I had just finished university, and being the cool Christian that I was, I did what was the equivalent of a quick program in my church. I became an intern, and my role, as well as the collective project of doing student work, was to develop preaching, and I would go to different places and I would speak, and I had loads of preaching engagement. And there I was, age 21, going to become an international sensation. I knew my Bible so well. My diary was busy with speaking engagements. I was being mentored at the time by someone who was the UCCF regional director for the Southwest, who basically asked me to speak at Christian unions that he didn't really want to go to. So there I had the honour of going to speak at the University of the West of England, UWE, Bristol. And I thought, I know the book of Philippians. I can bash out a few messages, it'll be fine. I didn't really prepare too much. The first talk I did was amazing. People were in awe. I could have done an altar call and we would have seen many people repenting. And then it went downhill from there until I got to the final Sunday, where really it should be a really good time of response. And I realized I didn't really have a message at all. And so I did as any good charismatic would do, and I said, I believe God wants to speak for a few people here. So if anyone has something they want to share, to do so now, of course, in a very sort of a background where not many people were using spiritual gifts. It went down like a lead balloon. But then I had a friend who very helpfully got up and he basically preached a really good message on prayer. And on that day, I got some good egg on my face and I was humbled. And I wonder, when in your life can you trace God mercifully allowing you to get egg on your face, where he has humbled you in your pride, where he's shown you, if you want to be safe, if you want a place to belong, if you want a place to call home, if you want to have beauty and significance, you will find it, but it will only be in God. If you're questioning your significance today, if you're questioning how much God loves you, how complete you can really be in him, be reminded by the words of Psalm 139. From verse 13, you formed me My inmost parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, my soul knows it very well. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. If I would count them, they are more than the sand of the sea. I awake and I am still with you. Do you want to know how valued? Do you want to know how approved you are by God? Do you want to know what you need to do to achieve something? You can just stay in your seat, because as we'll come to communion in a moment, Jesus has done it all. So that before we spoke anything, before we did anything, before we said anything, we were loved by God. And so God mercifully builds a better tower. And I won't spoil Nick Lunn's thunder next week. But what he does is he takes someone and he says, I'm going to continue this mission to being a blessing to all the nations. I've scattered you. And he zooms in on a man called Abram, who in of himself has nothing. He's old. He's sterile. There's no chance of a family coming from him and his wife. And yet he chooses that frail man. He says, I'm going to make a home for you. I'm going to make your name significant because you're going to make a name for me. I'm going to tie you to greatness. And one day from you will be scattered families of all the earth. And I will be able to unite all the different languages through you. And we see a glimpse of that from the Apostle John, when he says in the book of Revelation, he sees a glimpse of what heaven is like. And he says in Revelation 7:9, after this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, and crying out with one loud voice, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. And there you have it. Scattered people, brought together, not speaking one language, not proclaiming themselves, but brought together by the glory of Jesus, of which there is no son needed because he becomes the Son. His glory brings them together, multiple languages, no longer a slave to Babylon, but a part of the new city. No longer gathered around a tower, a monument, but gathered around the towering throne of God, proclaiming his wisdom, his glory, his power, and his salvation throughout all eternity. As we come towards the end, the reality is today we have two towers we can build in our life. We can spend our life building. We can build a monument to ourselves, which will only disappoint. Or we can build a tower for God's name, which the Bible tells us his name is a tower, that even when the righteousness run into it, they are saved. They're secure. They have all that they need. It's ironic, isn't it, that the name Nimrod, this man who thought he was mighty, the Americanism for Nimrod, now just means idiot, dimwit, stupid, or as the Germans would say, Dummkopf. You can only work on one of these two monuments. You can only build a tower for yourself. You can only do your will, or you can do his will. You can build your kingdom, or you can live for his mission. You can direct all praise back to God, or you can keep it for yourself. I wonder if God is getting your attention this morning. Maybe he's reminding you of a tower of disappointment. And he's not doing it to punish you. He's not allowing things to crumble to punish you, but to be merciful, to remind you that sin and idols will only ever disappoint. And in contrast to what God offers, which is satisfaction for all eternity. And that is what we're going to remember as Michelle now comes up and leads us into communion. We remember that the thing that we want to be the tower of which we bow before is the cross, of which we become undone, and of which we say with the Apostle Paul, looking at all his achievements, may I never boast except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, through which the world has been crucified to me and I to the world. Let us come and rebuild our lives as we come before the tower of the cross.